Hi all, I have another amazing game of Leela to show you today against Fizbo. So Fizbo is a high-ranking CCRL rating list engine, ranked 6 at the moment. And this is in the ChessCon Blitz Cup. Let's see what happened. D4, D5. So Leela playing white, C4, and Fizbo accepts the Queen's Gambit. E3, knight F6. Bishop takes c4, a6. This is pretty standard stuff so far. White castles, b5. Now, perhaps more solid in a way is c5. This seems to be the main book move. For example, like this, where in fact we could end up with a symmetrical pawn structure here. If you look at this pawn structure, this looks like it's real World Championship game material to bore the spectators to death. But in this game, actually, Fizbo plays b5 and now c5, very aggressive in a way. But there's a slight downside here. a4, it kind of punctures these light squares in Fizbo's position. They're slightly more vulnerable, especially that c4 square here. Knight bd2, bishop b7, queen e2, c takes d4. Now, I have some high-level stem game references you might want to check out in the pinned comment. Knight bd7 has been played before. For example, in Akobian against Kaidanov. That was in the St. Louis tournament of 2013, ending in a win for white, actually. So that's an interesting alternative, knight bd7. But here, yeah, c takes d4 seems tempting enough. It gives white that isolated queen's pawn here. Nice blockade square here. And this bishop looks quite good on this diagonal. It looks as though this is a nice position for black in general. Bishop e7 was played here. Another interesting stem game. Yasser Sohan played a brilliancy game. Let me just quickly show you that for interest with knight c6. And actually, after knight e4, bishop e7, Yasser Sohan, actually in this position, played the remarkable knight takes d4, and yeah, he allowed this knight takes e6 because he had up his sleeve the idea of giving up his queen for several pieces, and he won pretty soon after. Let's have a quick look. So you get another game, a bonus game free in this game. So Yasser Sohan coordinated his pieces for the queen sack. Yeah, that was pretty desperate, and then it was just a totally winning position in the end. Here he just crashed through. Yep, white resigned there. So that's interesting. Knight c6 then from Yasser Sohan in this position. But here Fizbo plays bishop e7. And we have a5. And there's a concern here about this pawn being slightly dislocated from black's position. It is held at the moment by this bishop. But look at the light squares around the pawn as well. You know, maybe there's a rook left later. For example, or yeah, on c4 later, this pawn could be vulnerable basically to attack later. We have black castling, rook d1. Now here again, there's another high-level stem game. Maxim Delugi, a great player, online player as well on ICC. You might have heard of Maxim Delugi. On rook d1. Yeah, Maxim actually in this position played knight c4. Sorry, his opponent played knight c4. This was in Burke's Bursis against Delugi in San Diego 2006. Delugi played rook a7 here, believe it or not. Looks a bit awkward, you might think, but in fact, look at black's position. It kind of unraveled quite well to be quite solid. And look at this nice blockade on d5, nice hyper-modern style play here. It looks actually quite solid there, and Delugi won that in about 39 moves with the black pieces. Okay, but here we don't have knight c4 as in that game. We have rook d1 from Leela, knight c6, knight b3, h6, bishop f4. We have queen d5, h3, rook fc8. So if we take stock of the imbalances here, Leela is actually It looks as though, hold on a sec. So one little question to ask, which actually didn't occur to me too much before, was, Leela as actually giving up the knight here, but actually I don't believe this can be taken. If we look at this position, it looks as though bishop c4 and the queen's trapped, so that's not a problem, by the way. So rook c8, we have bishop e3, king h8. Now bishop c4 officially protecting the knight. Queen f5, knight fd2. Here you might think harassing the queen's a good idea. Well, you might not actually, but there's always, if you play g4 straight off the bat here, if you were trying to harass the queen, then knight takes, clearly this is bad news, bears, because the bishop's actually quite dangerous on this diagonal. So for example here, this is just devastating, but g4 at some point might actually be effective, and this knight maneuver back does imply that there might be a g4 on the cards, because the queen hasn't got that many squares. Okay, she can run back over here maybe to h7, but yeah, the queen's safety is at stake here. Queen g6 was played. We have queen d3, just offering exchange of queens. The queen is bearing down on the sensitive g2, conspiring. Yeah, so this has to be addressed. There might be issues like knight takes d4 here to be addressed, threatening to checkmate. So queen d3, trying to get rid of any ideas like that by hitting the queen. Queen h5, queen f1, knight d5, and here bishop e2 is played, hitting that queen again. Not minding, okay, so not minding potentially about knight takes e3 here, as we see actually now. Queen g6 was played. On knight takes e3, which hits the queen, so this could be a legitimate response for this queen attack. Taking here, queen g5, queen f2, this position seems quite pleasant for white, a small edge. So queen g6 for the moment. Knight c4, again not minding knight takes e3, and in fact Fizbo did take on e3, and in one respect, okay, it loses the dark square bishop, but there's a central pawn island now supporting each other. e3 is supporting d4. Now we have rook ab8, rook dc1, knight d8, and you'll note with knight d8, that's one more piece which is not guarding this b4 pawn. This b4 pawn seems to be getting a little bit looser now. Watch out for it. Knight bd2. We have f6, bishop d3, queen goes to g5, queen e2, rook c7. Now, with the knight holding e3, it is actually possible to challenge black's queen with queen g4, even not caring about the double pawns there. Black actually played f5 though in response. Queen takes, bishop takes, now protecting e3 again with the bishop, with the king as well as with the knight. f4, and it looks visually as though, hang on a sec, this looks really impressive after f4 because of e4. Look at this center. Is it that vulnerable? If black didn't play f4, let's give an example. If king h7, then knight b6 is interesting, hitting that rook. For example, rook f7, g3, stopping f4 in its tracks. And this position seems extremely nice, actually, for white, because then there could be a move like this, and then snapping off this pawn. There's all the defenders have left that b4 disconnected pawn here, it seems, in one way or another. So anyway, f4, maybe this smacks of a little bit of desperation already, basically. e4, yeah, this pawn does seem, it seems to have been really neglected. You know, the bishop move here, it was defending there, but tactical considerations perhaps. Rook d1, knight f7, we have knight b6, rook d8, knight f3. So both of these pawns, important pawn duo in the center, and they're both protected. So the knight's protecting this, the bishop's protecting this. Black here puts more pressure on e4, so trying to hit this center hard, maybe provoke e5, or something to get the d5 square, but in fact d5 much stronger perhaps than e5. So that shields the pawn. E takes, and now knight takes g5, hg. There's no other way of doing this really, because d takes e4 leads to a nice advantage after knight e6 for white. So d takes e4. Sorry, h takes g5 is mandatory, it seems. E takes d5, king g8. Rook ac1. Now you might be wondering, hold on a sec, what about this b4 pawn? Isn't it vulnerable here? The thing is, black has resources. If white tries directly to hit this pawn, black actually can play rook c5, it seems, counterattacking the a5 pawn. White could end up with a small edge, but it might not be enough to win this position. So Leela, by playing rook ac1, it's a slower and surer way of trying to tap into the b4 weakness, it seems. After rook e7, we have now bishop g6 stopping any ideas of doubling rooks here. The bishop, is stopping rook e8. So we have king f8 now, and it's here rook d4 without too much controversy. The a5 pawn having the cake and eating it. Eating it is not losing a5. Having the cake, well, trying to, is hitting b4 here. It also, the rook hits f4, which means actually h4 to undermine this little structure here would be nice as well. So black's pawns are feeling huge pressure now in this position at move 41. Black's really under pressure. The bishop has been blunted. The knight's really holding up key squares as well as defending d5. The bishop's also stopping many moves from black like e8 and controlling key squares as well. It's really, these three pieces here are really excellent in this position, actually, managing to put a lock on black's counterplay quite a bit if you look at this position. And being able to win material without controversy is a dream really come true. Black desperately just moves that pawn now, but then the other side, these guys are now attacked with this undermining move. Hit the pawn in its base and the pawn structure usually falls down. Nimzovich, my system, undermining pawn chains. h4, an undermining move. Knight b5, hitting the rook. The rook goes to b4, so still maintaining the pressure on black's poor pawns here. One of them seems to be likely to fall soon. Rook d6, hitting the bishop. So now actually a change of gear, h5, just to protect the bishop instead of keeping the undermining up. You might find that a little bit strange. In fact, bishop d3 does seem a legitimate alternative, technically. So say bishop takes, check. It seems like this is a good scenario for white anyway, because actually there's a winning pin there. Black's actually got to be really careful tactically after bishop d3 in any case. That does seem a legitimate alternative to h5. But anyway, rook d8. That variation wasn't entirely forced, but it shows bishop d3 was a reasonable alternative. Now the pawn's finally snapped off, so officially Leela is a pawn up now. And black did not dare to take on d5. Well, really, can't take this d5 pawn. You might be wondering, hold on a sec. Look at this bishop. It's controlling king escape squares here. In fact, Fizbo has to be content to be a pawn down with knight d6. Let's have a look at bishop takes d5. Knight takes d5 would drag the rook away from that first rank. This check looks lethal. So, yeah, Fizbo's a pawn down after rook takes b3. Knight d6. Can't get the pawn back. g3 undermining this way. And the f-file looks quite dangerous potentially as well with the king on f8. We have check, bishop takes, rook takes, rook d3 protecting d5, rook b4 hitting b2. But now an infiltration to the 7th rank, not minding rook takes b2 check. Capablanca would be proud here because the king would be really activated on rook takes b2. The king could go up the board like this and actually win f4 en route anyway to still be a pawn up. So actually bishop a8, king f3 anyway. Now we have rook b5 hitting a5, but Leela plays for this rook ending now, taking off there. G takes, now king takes, rook d8, king e5, rook takes a5, b3. This is a very promising rook and pawn ending because the king is so aggressive here. So Leela has maintained a nice positional advantage and material advantage throughout this game. Now this infiltration here, yeah, this d pawn, they say that the d pawn is one of the strongest pass pawns you can get as white. This strong central pawn, very, very dangerous. There's a big idea of rook c8 now. We have check, stopping that at least for a moment. King d6 goes around this way, and now king h6, and now king e7. And you might wonder, hold on a sec. Okay, here, d8 is threatened, surely. And why not try and stop that with rook a8? In fact, Fizbo gave up altogether, it seems, with king takes h5. Before going into that, let's see, why couldn't Fizbo play rook a8? Well, we'd have, for example, rook c5, and black can't really do anything in this position. If you look at this scenario where the rook is actually protecting h5, can come and take there, and systematically the rooks can improve, holding each other here to support h6. This would be really just crashing through this position. For example, rook g8, we just take there and then take on d8. And otherwise, what else? King h7, h takes g7, and black's getting mated actually. The king is actually cutting escape squares as well from the black king here, as well as putting pressure on d8. So that sort of stuff could arise. So this is basically just giving up now a whole rook, allowing d8 there. So Fizbo's been really positionally outplayed in this game. But to Fizbo's credit, there was a more solid opening variation that could have been played earlier. But yeah, this is just, let's see, did Leela troll? Not much, actually. So yeah, a nice positional game. Black's structure did become shaky later on. The b4 pawn became increasingly weak, and the counterplay was really kept to a minimum throughout this game. So quite impressive positioning, I believe, to study this in more detail maybe. Check out the pinned comment. Hope you enjoyed it. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks so much.